Hello, and welcome to the Folklore and Fiction podcast. My name is Kelly MacCath-Moran. I'm a PhD candidate in the Folklore Department at Memorial University of Newfoundland, and I'm also a speculative fiction writer under the pseudonym C.S. MacCath. The Folklore and Fiction podcast and Dispatch synthesize these passions with a focus on folklore scholarship aimed at storytellers. You'll find the Folklore and Fiction archive along with the rest of my work online at folkloreandfiction.com. Interested listeners will find a link to the current dispatch in the show notes, where a more comprehensive record of this episode can be found, including a bibliography and other references. This episode of the Folklore and Fiction podcast was first published as a newsletter in October 2019. I'm recording it as a supplemental podcast now so that new listeners and subscribers have an opportunity to engage with the material. In it, I'm discussing the Tall Tale with help from scholars Richard Bauman, Carolyn S. Brown, Henry B. Wonham, and others, helping you analyze a tall tale and discussing ways to bring tall tales to your storycraft. The tall tale is difficult to trace through history, but Brown cites examples of it in Plutarch's writing and in Baldassare Castiglione's Book of the Courier. Both tales, spaced 1,500 years apart, describe weather so bitterly cold it froze words after they were spoken, which had to be thawed by various means in order to be heard. The tall tale was often ignored by 19th century European collectors of folklore, many of them German, but we knew it was present in the oral culture of the region. 100 years earlier, the real Baron Munchausen's tall tales about his life and career inspired Rudolf Erich Rasp's book, Baron Munchausen's narrative of his marvelous travels and campaigns in Russia. There's a great deal more information about the genre's development in the early United States, where it flourished in political and cultural satire. In newspapers and novels, writers like Mark Twain used the tall tale as a comedic narrative form through which characters like Tom Sawyer entertained cultural insiders in a way that invited misinterpretation by cultural outsiders. This triangle of storyteller, insider audience, and outsider audience was and remains important to the genre, so much that Bauman and other scholars emphasize its oral expression over its literary counterpart, since the greater humor value lies in the immediacy of the storyteller's exaggeration of truth, the insider's participation in the joke, and the outsider's relative gullibility. Brown's definition of the tall tale is quite good and follows from my discussion above, so I'll offer it to you here. She writes that, quote, "The tall tale is a fictional story which is told in the form of a personal narrative or anecdote, which challenges the listener's credulity with comic outlandishness, and which performs different social functions depending on whether it is heard as true or fictional." End quote. However, there are no details in this definition, and we need them to understand how the tall tale is constructed, so let's dig a bit deeper. A personal narrative or anecdote. The tall tale is a discrete form of oral narrative anchored in human events. This means that the composition of elements comprising the tall tale is unique enough to be called a distinct genre, that this genre finds its best expression in performance, and that the tales themselves are told as if they actually happened. Bauman writes that the tall tale is also a male expressive tradition arising from social encounters in which men tell big fish stories, whoppers, and other kinds of entertaining lies to one another as a form of play and a contest of wit and words. Challenging the listener's credulity with comic outlandishness. Tall tales are comical lies told as truth. They may begin with a storyteller's effort to proclaim himself a trustworthy narrator with phrases like "I guarantee," offers to prove his honesty, or assertions that other people find him reliable. From here, the storyteller aims to create confusion in his listeners about the extent of the lie, which often proceeds along a continuum, quote, "from the mildly improbable, through the physically impossible, to the mind-jarringly illogical," end quote. When combined with the deadpan delivery style common among tall tale tellers and the equally common use of exaggeration and understatement by turns, the tall tale becomes a slippery, surreal thing full of absurdities that are often hard to pin down. This episode of the Folklore and Fiction podcast is a preview, and you can listen to the full episode on the Folklore and Fiction website. Just click on the dispatch link in the show notes or go to folkloreandfiction.com and sign up for a free account. Thanks very much for your interest. Copyright 2019 to 2023. Kelly S. MacCath-Moran. All rights reserved unless Creative Commons licensing is specifically applied.